So we're starting now GITTEN, DAF BAYT and Aleph. So now the Mishnah is discussing a case of where which was common occurrence in those days, and up until the recent development of technology, it was still common. In the beginning of the 19th century, you still found these cases where somebody would live in a distant land and decide at a certain point that he wanted to divorce his wife, and he would send a shliach with a get. Now the shliach that he made to bring the get was called a shliach hava. It was the Baal shliach. The Baal himself created the shliach, and he acted as the Baal, because the divorce wouldn't happen until the shliach gave it over to the lady's hand. Just as every get needs to be given over to the lady directly from the Baal, so the shliach took the place of the Baal and was able to be that yad of the Baal and be able to divorce his wife. So this shliach that was bringing the get, in order to know that everything that is actually coming from the Baal, we required the shliach to say b'fanei nachtam b'fanei nachtam. Learning the Gemara exactly why we required him to say that. It's machlokes, but nonetheless, he was required to say that in order to make the get a valid get. Up until until nanotechnology of when it was easy to track a person and find out if it's really true, there were shragas and shuvas about these cases even at the beginning of the 19th century till when people moved to America. They were going to the Golden Medina, and they left their wives behind, and at a certain point they decided that they were just going to send their get for whatever reason. Again, this was required of them to say b'fanei nachtam b'fanei nachtam even in that time. Till now that there's airplanes, and even with modern technology it's a little bit easier. I don't think that it's much easier to validate the shtar and everything like that. So I don't know how much you're required if you create a shliach at this point now.
Well, the whole idea of shlicha shalom kamosa is that if you today fax or email somebody, is that considered a shliach?
I don't know that. I mean, I know that's a big shaila. I don't know what that does. Making shlichas over the phone. I don't know what these things. I don't.
The whole problem with 9/11.
That was a guna in 9/11.
That's different.
It was a guna problems because no one saw that he died.
But he also wanted to give him.
He wanted to give shlichus to write it down.
Right. He wanted to do the get before he knew what was happening. He was asking how to do that.
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Okay. So fine. It says it starts the Mishnah. Hamevi get Medinas Hayam. Somebody brings a get from Medinas Hayam. Now, Tosfos says that Medinas Hayam usually refers to a distant place, because we don't use the terms of Eretz Yisrael, because even though Eretz Yisrael was, just to explain this, Eretz Yisrael was really the place, the Torah center of the world, and that's why they understood all the halachas of GITTEN. So therefore, in Eretz Yisrael, we will see is when they did not have to say b'fanei nachtam b'fanei nachtam. So if someone brought a get from Medinas Hayam, now Medinas Hayam does not necessarily mean outside of the borders of Eretz Yisrael, because anything which was distant from the Torah centers, so it could have even theoretically been within the borders, but as long as it was far from the Torah centers and far from people that knew the halachas, then it would also be required. So that's what we refer to as Medinas Hayam, because it has distant lands and not necessarily in distances in mileage distance, but as in distance from the Torah centers. You have to say it was written in front of me and it was signed in front of me. Those were two cities who were on the border of Eretz Yisrael. They were also held that they were also of the opinion that it had to be, you have to say from those cities. Even from these two cities, one was inside of Eretz Yisrael, one was outside of Eretz Yisrael. They were a short distance away. You still were required to say b'fanei nachtam b'fanei nachtam. The Chachamim say that the only time you're required to say b'fanei nachtam is only if you bring a get from Medinas Hayam to Eretz Yisrael, or v'hamelech you bring it from Eretz Yisrael you bring it out to Medinas Hayam. The Gemara explain what the machlokes is exactly between the Chachamim and the Tanakama. If you bring a get within from two countries in Medinas Hayam, you will also be required, because again, since there were no people that were going between the two cities, between the two countries really, you would have to say b'fanei nachtam in order to be able to validate the signatures, and that was one of the other reasons the Gemara is going to discuss why you need Vanachtav to say that it was really the Baal. So since it was not easily verifiable between the different, since the countries were not necessarily people going between them, you'd also have to say Vanachtav. Even if you had one city that had two different leaderships on it, and they did not allow you to go between the two cities, like East Berlin and West Berlin, so even though they were very close and not separated by too much, but since they were not easily able to pass between the two, you'd also have to say Vanachtav. Rabbi Yehuda gives us the borders of where the Eretz Yisrael, at least as it pertains to our case, you would have to say B'fnei Nachtav and not say B'fnei Nachtav. The eastern border of Eretz Yisrael was Rechem. Rechem was on the border, at least for Gittin, but Rechem itself had a status of Chutz La'aretz as far as Gittin, and if you bring a get from Rechem into Eretz Yisrael, you'd have to say Vanachtav. Ashkelon Ashkelon was on the southern border, and Ashkelon itself had a status of outside of Eretz Yisrael. And Aker was on the northern border, and Aker had a din of outside of Eretz Yisrael. And the west, obviously, was the Mediterranean Sea. So therefore, once I guess you went to the Mediterranean Sea, you would also have to say B'fnei Nachtav. I think actually maybe the Gemara might discuss about it, the islands out there. Rameir Akoy Eretz Yisrael leGittin. Rameir says that as far as Gittin is concerned, Akoy is like Eretz Yisrael. Hamevi get Eretz Yisrael ain't it tzarich sheyamar B'fnei Nachtav. Someone who brings a get in Eretz Yisrael to another place in Eretz Yisrael does not have to say B'fnei Nachtav.
Isn't it intuitive from the previous part of the Mishnah?
Right, I think the Gemara is going to discuss exactly what as we go on the block, what exactly each one's arguing on. What's the but and if there are people that challenge the validity of the star, which is referring to the Baal, you would validate it by finding signatures and that were signed on it and validate it through there. My time. What is the reasons that we're requiring the Baal, the Shliach, to say B'fnei Nachtav? Rabbi Omar, Lefi, She'ein Bekin Lishma. Because people that were far from Eretz Yisrael and were not necessarily close to Torah centers did not know the halacha of Lishma. They did not know that it was required to be written specifically for this lady and for this man. As we found by Saita had the same halacha also, that was a machlekes really, whether the Megillah Saita had to be written Lishma for this lady. So over here, the get has to be written Lishma. Rava says the reason why he was required to say B'fnei Nachtav was because it was not easily able to be validated the shtar, and there would come out to a later complication. So therefore, we required him to validate it right now and say that he knows that it was signed in front of him. What halachic difference is there between these two mandamrim? If the two people who were signed on the get were the ones who brought it, so then they would right away be able to validate the shtar and say that they were here, they were able to validate it. Or even if they were not necessarily the two people that signed the shtar, but they knew who the people on the shtar were, so they could already say that we recognize these signatures and they can validate it. So they were here around in order if the Baal would come at a later date to be ma'ar on the shtar, they would be able to validate the shtar and say that it's a real shtar. Whereas according to Rabbi, who holds that it's ein bekin lishma, they would still be required to say B'fnei Nachtav because you still don't know that it's written lishma. Inami, another difference. In two Medinas, two areas that were under the control of different people, who also were not necessarily had shiaris mitzuyos. They did not have caravans that passed between there, so the information wasn't easily accessible. So therefore, they would be required to say B'fnei Nachtav in these cases. But as far as the Shema was concerned, we weren't concerned because in Eretz Yisrael they knew the halachas of the Shema. In one Medina, one country in Medina Sayyam, as far as finding Eidim to know whose signature is, that we could easily find out. But as far as Lil Shema, again, anyone outside of Eretz Yisrael, we assume did not know the halachas so well, and therefore they would still have to say B'fnei Nachtav. Ask the Gemara. Rabba, who's of the opinion that the reason why we have to say the Nechtam is because people do not know the halacha of Lishma. You should require them to have two Eidim. As just like every other Eidus in the Torah, we know that you need to have two Eidim. So too over here, if we need to have Eidus that says that this get was written Lishma, so you should require two Eidim. And to the Gemara, Eidach Neman B'Yisurin. One aid is believed by Yisurin. We have the klal, then is in Yisurim, halachos of Yisurin. One aid is believed. As the Gemara, when do we say that an echad neman is believed by Yisurin? In a case when you have a question if this is a chaylev or this is shuman. Because we don't know specifically this piece was ever usher at any point. But in our case, where the lady was already married to Eishes Ish Havi, we already know that she is an Eishes Ish and she's already usher. There's no, when the halacha is by Davar Sheba, even though it's also a case of Yisurim, but the halacha is Ein Davar Sheba Vachas Mishnayim, and you need two people to say a halachic status for this lady. Answers the Gemara, really, most people, even outside of Israel, know the halacha of Lishma. That's not what we're concerned about. Even according to Rav Meir, he is afraid of a case for the minute percentage that may not know the halacha. So, and he also should be choshev for this case. Most people who write GITTEN and most people who are bezdins that are making these GITTEN know the halachas. So what was the reason that they were choshesh for? We're afraid that there may be somebody who wrote a get kosher for his wife, and then he decided for whatever reason not to divorce his wife. And somebody, we have this case very often, a person who also lived in a city and his wife is the same name as that fellow's wife, and his name is the same fellow. Their names are the same, and their cities are the same. So he might decide to take that get that was already written and use it for himself. So even though it was written by a bezdin, but this other they switched the people that were using it, so therefore it was not lishma. So that was the reason why we required them to say b'far nechtam. And the Rabbanan required because of this chashash that they may use it and switch the people. Because of the case that if you would require them to have two Eidim in every case, because of the chash that you might switch it, require them to validate the shtar. And if you're going to require them to have two, you might not necessarily find two people that are going to your hometown to bring the get. So therefore, we allowed you to only have one person.
In this case, when they're saying lishma, they mean intent?
Yeah. What do you mean? Lishma has written specifically for her, for this lady.
Right.
Right. Ask the Gemara. Ask Gemara, "Hi kulahu chumrahu." Why are you saying that this is a leniency? This ends up with a stringency, not necessarily in the leniency and stringency as we usually use it. It's just that you can come out with a problem later on when you're trying to get around problems. You're trying to make it easier for people to have the divorce to work out. But you can come out with a big problem over here because if you're going to allow one aid to come here, what's going to happen? If the Baal comes at a later date and said, "I never sent this get," right? So we're going to have to scrambling now to find Eidim to validate the shtar. But if we require two Eidim to come, right? Then the Baal right away when he comes, we say, "Jump in the lake." Sorry, we already have two Eidim. We can't listen to you. So it says in Gemara, if you require to have two, you the Baal will have no ability to challenge the validity of the shtar. But if there's only one aid, then the Baal has the ability to challenge the validity, and then you will be required to go and validate it at a later date. So how come we allow you to get away with one? We should require two still. And so the Gemara, this shliach that brings the get, he was not allowed to give it by himself, him and the lady. He was required to give it in front of a couple of people. The machlekes whether or not you need to have two other people there or three other people enough. So this shliach who knows if he meets somebody out in a far off land, and he says, "Would you do me a favor and bring a get to my wife?" So he's and he knows now that if he goes and brings this get to the wife, and he divorces her, and then a couple months later the Baal's going to show up. What's going to happen? The Baal will say, "Oh, it's a forged document. I never divorced her." So who's going to look bad? They're going to say this guy comes to Eretz Yisrael with this get, and he says he's divorced. He's trying to this shliach is trying to cause problems for everybody. You see, the Baal never divorced her; that it never happened, and he just brings a get and made up some forged get and bring it there. So therefore, this shliach would come out looking pretty embarrassed. So therefore, before he would agree to bring a get for anybody, he would check out this Baal and make sure that this guy really wants to divorce his wife, and he's not afraid this guy's going to come at a later date to bring it, because everybody's going to know, since it was given in front of a lot of people, everybody would know that he was the shliach who brought it, so therefore he would come out looking funny. So therefore he checked out the Baal to make sure the Baal was serious about it, and the Baal was not some sort of trickster that was going to end up coming back and being ma'ar on the get and just trying to make problems. Stop there.
Yeah.